Okay, well, for the next half an hour, we're talking about dynamic digital out-of-home advertising, and we're going to have a look at its potential and, in fact, whether it's a game changer and any possible barriers to entry. And we have three expert panelists who are going to give us their views. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves each in turn. And also, while they're doing that, give us an example of a campaign that they really like or which at least illustrates the concept really well. So welcome to you all. And Emma, you kick us off.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma Withington. I am the head of planning at Gottlieb OMD. The campaign I wanted to talk about was one that we did for Specsavers recently, which effectively used a live data feed of first-party client data, which was opticians' appointments and sort of booking availability in stores, and fed that into digital 6 sheets that were in and around stores to basically tell people what was available that day. They could book an appointment within an hour, that afternoon, and also the next day to really drive that footfall live into branches that hadn't been done before. And it was quite a feat in terms of technology to provide that feed in, but once it did, they saw a 68% growth in booking appointment volume, which was incredible. And something that they're going to carry on doing. So we're super proud of that work, but I think it really demonstrates the flexibility of dynamic out of home.
Great, okay. And Neil, introduce yourself and then just tell us about a campaign that you really liked.
Hi, I'm Neil Tookey, the Commercial Trading Director at Essence. I've seen some fantastic digital dynamic creatives over the years. I think the one that stood out for me was just before lockdown, when me and a few friends went to London to watch England versus Wales during the Six Nations. And as we was walking along, we saw a Guinness set pop up on a digital 6 sheet, telling us about a list of pubs that was showing the game. And it was then going into a Google Maps of where these pubs were. And actually, when looking into a bit more detail of the campaign, it was actually updating consumers with the footfall of these pubs, i.e. telling people if the pubs were too busy, maybe go to this pub. And I think that's just a really nice way of using dynamic feeds to interact with consumers and giving them that nugget of information that potentially will shift their mindsets in terms of where they actually would go. And I guess that was doing that.
Okay, and Liz, give us your example and introduce yourself first, obviously.
Yeah, hi all. I'm Liz Duff. I'm head of media and investment at Total Media, and we're the behavioural planning agency. So we sort of use behavioural science to connect brands to people. In terms of my example, I suppose I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't talk about one of our own. But I suppose the reason why it's an interesting one to me is it's quite an old example. It was actually some activity we ran for the Tate Britain back in 2013, and it was sort of the concept of it was sort of wanting to engage with visitors as they come into London, and sort of people who've flown in from overseas, and it sort of linked really famous works of art with real-time sort of weather data, travel conditions, traffic flow, flight time arrivals, stuff like that. So an example of it, we use things like Turner's The Storm, when the Met Office forecasting sort of bad weather conditions. But I suppose it's just showing how long ago we started thinking about it. I think a more recent example I've seen is actually in Australia, where the Cancer Institute was using UV index data to trigger like sun smart messages. And I think the more recent examples are sort of where people are using it to make it a lot more interactive. But I think that was also a really good example about sort of using it for, I suppose, social good as well as for the advertiser.
Yeah. Okay. And Emma, did you say 68% booking increase when people go into Specsavers?
Yeah, it was incredible. And I think what's really interesting, it's sort of a territory that usually you would think of for digital channels to sort of getting down into that real performance sort of behaviour. I guess, but it just opened up a whole wealth of customers for them. Like Liz, you talk about the behavioural science element of what you do. This was kind of rooted in that insight again, that, you know, to make people go into an optician, just make it really easy, make it really timely, and that's what those posters did. They just said, you can go into the branch that's round the corner and get an appointment this afternoon. And you know, often booking an eye appointment isn't the most interesting thing to do, but if we can make it simpler, which we did, it really worked for them. Yeah.
I mean, does any of you think this is a game changer? And I mean, reflecting that, is the ROI proven for dynamic? I mean, let's go around each in turn. So Neil, you go first.
100% it's a game changer. I mean, you know, Liz has used an example from 2013, so it's always been there. And every meeting that we have with all the key suppliers, it's a focus for them, that we're trying to drive more and more dynamic digital out of home on every brief that is out there and with our clients. The challenge is that we're still hearing stats that only nothing more than 5-6% is still dynamic digital out of home, even though that millions has been invested into the inventory, and there's more digital investment than there is paste investment. So it's shocking that we're still not there when we're showcasing these campaigns and these case studies. We're still in a very small minority of sample size of clients still using the advertising in the right way. So there's something missing, and whether it's creative agencies aren't ready or agile in that space yet, or if it's not using the right data sets when we're using the response in our planning. I think it's evolving, and programmatic out of home will make it evolve, and hopefully the accessibility to that will sort of push it forwards, and we'll start seeing more and more case studies and more return of investment. So out of home is going northwards rather than potentially standing still.
Yeah. All right. Well, Liz, I mean, before you answer the question on whether it's a game changer, do you have a view on why it's not happening? I mean, Neil mentioned only 5 to 6% being spent on it, which he said was shocking. I mean, what do you think are the barriers?
I think it's to a certain extent, it's still a lack of knowledge. I think when Dynamic sort of first came into the market, some of the data sets were still quite expensive. I worked on some activity where I think we paid about 20k for some mobile data, which, you know, for some clients that's going to be prohibitive, because you need to actually have the confidence that it's worthwhile making that investment. I think that's not the case anymore, actually. I think you can access the data, you can build the creative a lot more easily. But I think there's a perception change piece that we need to do to a certain extent. Because, yeah, I think when you sort of think about that, how powerful it is, and sort of combining that digital agility and flexibility and relevance with sort of the scale and impact of out of home, you'd sort of go, why aren't we doing it? But yeah, I think there's so much more budget out there that we could be spending here that we definitely should be.
So what is the perception piece then? Do people not, is it just a matter of time realizing the value of it, or seeing more case studies, or, you know, what's the perception?
I think it's a combination. I think, you know, the Moments of Truth study that came out went a long way towards it. I think that sort of really demonstrated the positive impact of it, and that sort of a positive impact in terms of sales effect, sort of in terms of ad effectiveness. But I think it's also around sort of just helping advertisers understand it doesn't have to be that difficult, I suppose, and there's not sort of a premium on it, and it doesn't have to take a really long time. I think sometimes when you talk to brands about Dynamic, they start thinking we're going to have to sort of take much longer doing the production side of it, sort of build in all these data feeds. And, you know, you've got partners such as we work with Posterscope, and, you know, things like Live Poster. It just makes it really simple to do, but we need to shout about it a bit more, I suppose.
Okay, and Emma, what's your view? I mean, is the ROI proven, and is it a game changer?
I mean, I agree with Neil. I think it is a game changer. It should be more frequently used than it is currently. I think the ROI point's interesting. There are a lot of studies, obviously, that prove the effect, but I think, we're still yet to crack the way that we measure out home with econometrics. I think even dynamic, whilst it's a better live feed of potentially performance data that we can use, there are still constraints to how we measure that media channel versus others, that some clients are just always going to come back to, and it's always going to be a bit of a challenge, particularly when potentially what we're comparing it to is further along the sort of funnel in line with digital channels. It's not going to stack up in the same way, where digital is more advanced in terms of the cost of data and then sort of all the elements with that. But I don't know, I definitely think there's a lot more opportunity. I agree with Liz that the data cost is prohibitive in some instances. I've seen some brilliantly creative examples of how we could use different data sets that would really bring a campaign or a creative idea to life, and then you get to the stage of, okay, well, how do we actually do that? And suddenly you're faced with quite lumpy charges around how you physically do that. But as I think more people do it, the industry develops, as you say, all the media owners are investing in this, so costs should come down accordingly. So I think it's all opportunity, and I think the more we do it, the more we prove it, and when we talk about it, hopefully, the more growth we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, Liz, you mentioned the case study for Tate, where they had multiple data inputs, and I mean, do you go to a client with your sort of perfect data input to give them the best possible creative outcome, and then they just shave various data inputs off until it's back to kind of weather and time, or?
I mean, it depends what you want to do, to be honest. Sort of, you reference that campaign. I think we started off with sort of a pool of about 10 million possible combinations. We ended up running, it was over 10,000 different executions. But I think sort of the more we can automate things, it just makes it a lot easier. I think an interesting idea we're talking to clients more and more about is sort of, how do we integrate data sets from other channels as well? And I think, the work that you were doing around sort of the digital marketplace and sort of a more automated or programmatic type of trading sort of just means that we can start building in so many different data feeds. So again, sort of, as I said, it doesn't have to be sort of scary and complicated for a client. We can make it really simple and sort of just work with really simple templates, and then sort of the rest we do in the background.
Okay. And Neil, what purpose does this serve within the campaign, whether it's within the out-of-home campaign or within the marketing campaign generally? So the dynamic part, I mean, is it about brand building, or is it activation, or is it a pure combination of both?
I mean, brand building, when out-of-home does brand building, they're probably going to go down the broadcast route, aren't they? They're going to buy a blend of and digital assets to maximise UK coverage. I think if you measure it over time, and I'd love to see more strategies and clients measuring brand building over time using out of home, but I think it's more used from an activation point of view. You're trying to either direct people to a call of action and to a call of search, and using nuggets of data and contextual messaging to show that sales uplifts for those brands. So I'd definitely go down the activation route. Okay.
And Emma, I mean, I guess the spec savers, that would count as activation, but I guess there is brand building within.
Yeah, no, that spec savers is definitely activation. I kind of think it depends entirely on the nature of the client campaign, but we've seen it work brilliantly. We did some work for John Lewis last year that was all about their kind of autumnal home collection work, and we were trying to remind people how lovely it was to feel cozy at home, and we used kind of time data, weather when it got a bit rainy and wet, and you were sat at a cold bus stop. Trying to encourage people, to remember that feeling of how it's nice to be tucked up at home, and that was purely brand. That was really about just trying to get front of mind for people to think about a category and kind of the part of John Lewis that perhaps they weren't. And there wasn't really a huge call to action on that bit, but it was a great use of contextualizing a message against an environment that people were in. So I think it can flex. I think it just calls on the planners to be creative with that, to really think about what's the purpose, and is there a role for that level of data that is worth, you know, putting into those sites to make that communication more powerful. So, you know, it can, as with every channel, it kind of can do everything, but it's that being really focused on what it is that you want to do and working out whether the effort warrants the outcome.
Yeah, so given how long it would probably take to show the sort of the extra incremental brand effects, I mean, is it basically an act of faith today if you spend money on data for a brand build like that?
I don't think so, because I think, you know, Liz has mentioned the moments of truth work. I think there is evidence out there to say that it does have a positive impact. I think obviously mentioned the ROI challenge, but there are more ways of tracking this activity that do prove it has a positive impact. You know, I think the longer term build of that in and of itself, I don't think that a dynamic advertising campaign would solely be responsible for building a brand. That's obviously a range of channels that's doing that in combination. But I don't think it's a leap of faith. I think that we know with the right work, it can deliver a positive outcome for a brand. But measurement is really important of it, you know, making sure that you know what it is that you're trying to do so that you can report that success. I think is super important.
Okay, and Liz, is it brand or activation or both?
I'm going to sit on the fence. No, it kind of is both. I suppose what we look at is it's the whole point of dynamic is to make your ad more noticeable. And I suppose it's putting it in that context, because sort of where and when and in what mindset we're exposed to an ad really sort of impacts on how we respond to it. And sort of we talk a lot through sort of the work that we do at our behavioural consultancy sort of about the importance of relevance, and that can both be in terms of an activation and a brand building job. So it's definitely a combination of it. I think dynamic has all of sort of the brand building attributes of regular posters, but then it builds another level on top of it. So it's sort of definitely can be used for brand building, and I think a lot of the work that Videonet has done around it sort of demonstrates that, but also it can be used for those shorter term activations. I suppose it's all about doing it to be memorable, and whether that's to deliver an immediate sort of response to it or the brand building effect. I think it can be both.
Yeah. So what other activations might we see? So Liz first, so we've seen a good example of there are available bookings or appointments at an optician. Presumably the Tate drove people to the gallery, but I mean, what other things can we do for the activation side?
I think a really interesting one is sort of around customer data and actually customer behaviours, and using dynamic to sort of tailor the activity based on what customers are doing at the time. And whether that's, I think Shop Direct was a really nice example of that, the activity they ran a while ago for Black Friday, and it was sort of pushing out different products depending on sort of what people were searching for in different areas, but also sort of live availabilities. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and sort of certain brands who are sitting on a lot of customer data sort of could be using that a lot more. And that is an example of how it can actually drive the activation side of it as well as the brand side.
Yeah. And Neil, do you see the same thing, more use of customer data, a sort of more availability, I guess, and pushing things that you want to sell that day?
Yeah, 100%. Customer data is key, but I think especially in today's market, we're going to be looking at health data. We're going to be potentially, if we can get access to finance data, and because we're moving into a different world now, aren't we? I think there's going to be a lot more contactless payments rather than cash handlings. So I think that would be an interesting space to research and to see what clients want to do in that space. Because let's face it, we're all going to be looking at our well-being now a bit more so. So if there's stuff around smartwatches, that we can then look at that data and then relate those messages. I think I've seen recently some vitamin ads as an example, and if you can overlay that in certain times of day, some days of week, and certain locations where potentially you're closer to parks, maybe, for example, then yeah, it's going to be a good way of utilising data alongside messaging.
Okay, and Emma, I mean, is there any other activation opportunity that you see that hasn't been mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Customer data is really exciting. Difficult sometimes to get hold of, but once you can, it can really unlock stuff. The other one for me is social data. I think that the opportunity that out of home has to kind of be that commentator on what's happening around you, both sort of physically and culturally, is really exciting. Obviously, you know, it's been used quite recently with, you know, being a real sort of national notice board, I guess, for what's been going on with coronavirus, but how we can use social feeds into spot trends, spot topics of conversation, you know, things like that. I think, you know, we could have a bit more fun with to really understand what's kind of on people's minds and how outdoor can react to that. I think that's a real area of opportunity.
Okay. And in terms of attribution, Liz, if we're talking about activation, I mean, do we have enough attribution data readily available in the short term to sort of, you know, to meet clients' expectations? So if you're driving people obviously to a shop, can they, even with CRM data, does it come back fast enough for their liking?
I think probably not as much as some clients would want. I think that the point of it, I suppose, is that out of home is still fundamentally a broadcast medium. It doesn't have that direct attribution as such, and you know, you can use store footfall and stuff like that to actually help with that, although there are sort of issues around mobile data location accuracy. I think it's a really interesting conversation, and it's one I sort of compare to when we sort of saw VOD emerging, actually, and it's about not going down the digital rabbit hole just because you think you should. And the VOD example is sort of, we were getting a lot of pushback sort of from clients in the early days of VOD saying, look, my click-through rates aren't as high as they are on other digital formats, so it's obviously not working. And there was a lot of conversations around, but what are you actually using it for? What's the right environment? And it's sort of, I suppose it's just because you can apply more of digital metrics or sort of digital type data feeds, it's sort of don't lose sight of what you're actually using a channel for. And I suppose if brands can track performance elements, they will. But out of home, ultimately, it's not an online performance medium.
Okay, I mean, Neil, do you see any value at all for sort of real-time campaign optimization using, you know, a billboard is working really well at a station, it's driving people into a local shop or store. You know, is there any interest in buying up some inventory nearby because it's working so well? I mean, is it possible?
100% it's possible, and there is value in it. I mean, the digital evolution has allowed us to buy day parting ways of buying out home, and I think that's probably the key area of a lot of volume in peak areas, whether it's, if we look at morning terms or drive time terms, those are probably the key day parts as such that clients want to be part of, and the suppliers will know that because they'll put premiums to those day parts, and then it's about who's going to be first in. I think the challenge is, if we're all on, there's probably 20 to 25 top advertisers that buy up front, buy a lot of space across the year, and then it's about how the rest of the market, or in some of those advertisers, how they optimize in and out at the right times to make their campaigns more relevant, rather than just buying the 2-week in charges that a lot of advertisers probably still are.
Yeah, I mean, do you think trading might change? I mean, could we see brands becoming more fussy about when they go dark or light? So, you know, if there are perfect optimum conditions for selling something and it comes once every 2 weeks, I mean, could people just go, you know, I'll just buy some boards once every 2 weeks rather than booking a sort of length of time and taking their chances?
Trading has to change. I mean, it already is changing. We're already moving from cost per panels to CPMs. We need to educate clients. We need to educate auditors more about that space. It needs to evolve quicker than it is. The fact that there's more DSPs out there that have got out-of-home inventory, the investment that obviously Global is going to put into the market, the Co's already there, Clear Channel's already there, Ocean are building upon what they're doing within their portfolio. So it's already changing. It just needs to be verified and made more accountable. And then I think more and more clients gain trust in that space and see the value of it. You know, we're already seeing minimum 30% efficiencies through Group M's trading desk. It's just, you need your personal ROI from a client's point of view to then trust it and then go again and then build more campaigns and then start looking at omni-channel way of buying. Whether if you're buying into out of home, you're buying it for that purpose, but can you then connect the dots with what you're doing in audio? Can you connect the dots with what you're doing in the programmatic online space? And if you can, then you've got a holistic view on the smart campaigns and then each channel working closely together. And I think that will fast track the medium and hopefully gain more inventory in its space.
I mean, Liz, would you like to see a world where you could wait for 1 hour of sunshine, and obviously sunshine would be a premium in the UK, so presumably that might become more expensive, that inventory. I mean, would that help or hinder you in terms of media planning and reaching audiences?
I mean, I suppose it all goes back to the effectiveness question, ultimately, doesn't it? It's sort of, is it worth paying the premium for the context of it? Is it driving enough sort of incremental sales, for example, to actually make it worth your while? I think at the moment, I suppose going back to Neil's point earlier about how much digital content is actually dynamically enabled and out of home, we're not there yet. We're not at the point where there's so much demand for certain contexts that, you know, you can build a massive premium on it because of the demand. There always will be, you know, premiums on the most demanded inventories. But I suppose that the interesting thing about dynamic is that different contexts will have different value for different clients. So it's not like, you know, on TV, when the World Cup's on, everyone's after that. It's sort of, for some clients, sunshine will be perfect. For other clients, it definitely won't be. So it's sort of, it's getting the market sort of hopefully gonna even out. But yeah, I think as more and more activity is sort of built or driven through the DSPs and stuff like that, you'll start to see sort of the CPMs going up and down and sort of matching that demand.
Okay. And Emma, what do you think? I mean, do you think this is for everyone? I mean, are there any barriers that would keep particular advertisers out of this?
I'd like to think it is. I'd like to think that the cost of entry can be managed through collaboration with creative agencies, media owners, outdoor specialists to enable anyone to be able to use it. And I guess particularly, you know, even if you are a smaller advertiser or a local advertiser, that doesn't stop you from being able to do it. I think it's the potentially prohibitive element is a sort of production cost or a nervousness around it's going to, you know, it might incur higher costs for the data, for the templating, but, you know, I think that this is an opportunity for people to get together and work out. So this is point almost, what's the real value of it? Is there a real opportunity? Is it worth it for our business, and therefore work out how to use it? I'd love to see more people using it for lots of different things because it will spur on other advertisers. So no, I can't think of, you know, a really valid reason as to why anyone wouldn't. It's more relative to the campaign, the objective, the task we're going to achieve. And then I'd hope that, you know, it's in everyone's interest to make that work, particularly the media owner community, so they would, you know, help advertisers in the same way that, you know, we've seen so many advertisers and media owners kind of doing things they never would have. You know, Sky's fun to get all those SMEs on TV, for example. That kind of behaviour is brilliant, and that should be something that maybe the outdoor industry can think about as well, how we can use dynamic to help smaller advertisers get on those screens would be a great thing to see.
Okay, and Neil, do you agree? Do you think that everyone can make use of dynamic?
100%. I think if we're not at least challenging the briefs with a dynamic point of view, then I don't think we're doing the briefs any justice. it's like the old saying, you know, you've got a canvas there. How can you use the capabilities of that canvas in the right way? It's got so many options. It's got a menu of options there to drive that impact better for the consumer. So if we're not answering those briefs with that dynamic sense, then I don't think we're doing our jobs properly. Don't get me wrong, there'll be some campaigns that just want to buy 4,000, 5,000 6 sheets, and they want to buy it cheaply, and that might work for them. But there's so much digital inventory out there that you need to use it in the right sense.
Okay, and what about the management of the creative? So asset management, I mean, if you start doing lots of different creative, is that within everyone's reach? Are we satisfied that we have the sort of asset management to deal with that?
Yeah, I think we have. Working with Kinetic, I've seen, like Liz mentioned before, that the costs have come down significantly, and you know, as tech evolves, and as these digital sheets evolve, it should give you the accessibility to show the creative nudges. I mean, we've all seen the Cadbury's case study by the Co, and just changing the messaging by the towns for those digital 6 sheets point of sale with Tesco's showed a immediate uplift that didn't have the town messages on the 6 sheets. So, and that's just a simple form. I mean, again, if your creative agency is charging you through the roof of putting Manchester on a digital 6 sheet versus not putting Manchester, then you need to start questioning what you're paying your creative agency. So, yeah, it shouldn't be a cost barrier.
Okay, and Liz, just a 30-second answer. Do you think this is something that every advertiser can make use of if they want to?
I think so, yeah. And what we're seeing is, I think the more digital economy businesses are sort of finding it easier to do it because they're used to sort of adjusting copy on an ongoing basis. So it's a lot easier for them to transition to it. But yeah, I don't think there's any reason why people can't use it. As I mentioned, sort of use templates. The timing, it doesn't have to take that long, and it doesn't have to be that complicated if you don't want it to be.
Okay, all right, well, just to wrap up, I'm just going to ask you to give an answer which is 1 out of 10 in how interested you are in hyper contextual targeting. So one of the examples I saw was the FT were using the gates at Heathrow to target people that were going to 6 different destinations only. So, you know, those are literally the only people in the world that see these ads at that point. So how interesting is that? That's hyper targeting. So let's start with you, Emma, as you're my top left.
10 being the most interested.
Yes, yeah.
I'm gonna say like a 7 or 8, because I think it doesn't matter that it's only those few people. If those people are the people that you want to talk to, then that's what you do. You know, I think, and the more relevant and the more surprising, I think we mentioned that word, sort of more attention we can grab, the better. So yeah, I'm all in.
Okay, Liz.
Yeah, I'm similar. I was going to go 9. I suppose it's all about, and I've said it before, sort of making advertising more noticeable and relevant. And you know, if you could do that by using someone's language, naming the local town, sort of anything like that, it's going to be more likely to get your attention and your interaction. It's not a new thing, but we know it works.
Okay, and Neil, wrap us up with your answer, 1 to 10.
John, I'm going to have to say 10 because you've used an Essence example there with FT, and FT would kill me if I say 10. So the uplift of that campaign was 50% with their subscription model. So it was a great campaign for them, and it clearly worked. So if we're seeing, and not every campaign is going to show those sort of uplifts, but if we can see those sort of uplifts, then they're going to continue using out home and should be using it in its dynamic sense.
Okay, that wasn't a fix because I didn't even know that was your campaign, but it was lucky for you. Anyway, okay, well, that was really, really interesting stuff. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us, and it's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Yes.